Mike gets settled in. Mike, you seem to have brought a friend. Can you introduce is it your wife or is it your boss? I don't know. Maybe your VC funder? Who is that?
Please meet Curry. Curry is our adorable home robot, and she's a little robot that runs around and takes moments throughout your day and your life at home, and she captures great things that you might have missed.
So I can already see this panel going sideways. One of the first rules in show business is never share the stage with a kid. Now we can add or a robot, because it'll surely do something to steal the show. But having said that, we like to innovate here at The Economist, so we're going to press on. So before we start, we have another polling question. Let's see if we have it up on stage, or we could put it back up. Okay. And you know how we've done it before once? Just answer using your app for the conference. Which decision would you first delegate to a computer or robot? Retirement planning, picking up your kids at school, managing your calendar, or your love life? So let's see what people say. Remember, this is semi-anonymous, so feel free to reveal your darkest secrets. We won't publicize your peccadillos. All right, let's start. Maybe we'll start, Kristen, let's start with you. Now, you run a company that does something very tangible, and that is applications of AI in hiring. Can you tell us what's wrong with the way that companies hire people today? Why do we need your services?
Thank you for the question. I think we should also say you shouldn't share the stage with the comedian who's so smart.
Oh, well, flattery will get you everywhere. So, all right, Curry, you're already down on this stage. Let's see if you can come up with any jokes. Does Curry tell any jokes?
Only in robot.
Oh, I see.
Looking forward to it. So, who here hires people? Has hired people? Okay, everybody. I'd like to say that how we hire today, despite the fact that we spend more money on people as enterprises and businesses than any other thing we spend money on, the way that we hire today is akin to the definition of insanity in many ways, despite best efforts. I think the key challenges with hiring is that with the advent of digital sourcing, companies get lots and lots of applicants, and they have the daunting task of deciding from that pile of applicants who they should hire, and there are steps in between. And I think the biggest reason that we're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is that we have really poor signals from things called resumes. And so we have unconscious bias in our process, and we are missing the opportunity to use data, which is typically existing in your existing employees, to understand what are the true factors of performance or retention, whatever your business goal is, and using those to in the hiring process.
So let's unpack that just a little bit, right? Because what you're saying is radical for most people. Most of us work at conventional companies that hire in the traditional ways, although we have enough innovative companies here represented that are embracing some of the new tools. I don't want to dismiss that. But for the folks that are not working in those environments, what's wrong with using resumes and GPAs and college pedigrees, which we've used for presumably hundreds of years? What's wrong with that? In your opinion, why is that suboptimal or awful?
Yeah, so most enterprises for early career talent will use where you went to college and what your GPA was as the initial screen to get people in, or typically will not hire people in some cases without a certain minimal GPA. For further along, they'll say, did you work at Facebook or Google or some version of that, historically as a predictor of performance. So evidence and research shows that academic success predicts future academic success. But there is no valid research or data to say that how you do in school will predict how you do in the workplace. If you think about school environments, they're very structured. Work environments are increasingly unstructured with massive amounts of ambiguity. It's no longer important to know the answers. It's important to know what questions to ask. So there's a whole lot of implications on academic environments and schooling systems, but it is not a good way to hire people.
So it's a combination of that was never the best way to do it, to the nature of work itself is changing. Yeah. And so perhaps we need to assess for different skills. Am I capturing that right?
That's correct.
Let's put the rubber to the road here. Mike, you run a company, and you've got a product. What do you think about this idea of hiring? I see a lot of fancy pedigrees at your team. Are you looking at ridiculous factors like how smart people are and how accomplished they are and how hard they work? I mean, clearly you're an old-fashioned guy if you're doing that.
It's one of the things actually that Kajin Chow and Sarah Zantosky, my CTO and COO, discuss a lot. The three of us talk about how we find great people. In the Valley, hiring is incredibly competitive. And anyone who's a little bit better at figuring out who's going to work out is going to have a huge edge. One of the things that I really love about working with Sarah is she keeps us honest. She points out that a lot of our strongest individual contributors would not have passed if you ran a strict hard screen in the traditional way on hiring software talent. That process that is used, GPA, school, how well did you do when we put you in front of a whiteboard and made you hammer through a couple of pseudocode tests, that's canted towards a certain kind of performance. The stuff that actually drives success is, of course, technical ability, of course, being smart enough, but it's a lot of the other things like ability to think through problems, ability to communicate, what people think of as softer skills that drive success for teams rather than single all-stars in just their subject, not paying attention to team skills and team success. So we definitely need more tools and we definitely need to do better. Looking strictly at individual subject performance is not predictive in our experience.
So you're getting some validation from the marketplace, as it were, Christian, that these are things that he's finding in practice. You're using AI to help, obviously, filter for some of these other qualities that you think are more predictive. But we're here to talk a little bit about robots as well in the workplace, not only how to get better people in the workplace or how to use AI. If I were to submit applications from robots, or can you envision your screening process for hiring, quote unquote, extending beyond people who graduated from a college and who have a pulse to Curry or Curry's siblings? How far can we extend this argument? Could AI test your AI and put it to the limit?
Well, I'll start with the factors that drive performance, and also to say that clearly we have work to do to ensure that the human talent is able to be augmented to higher order thinking, because the nice thing about robots doing the menial tasks is that it gives humans the opportunity to have access to data to make decisions, and so those decision-making skills are super critical. But there are 3 buckets of things that matter pre-hire that predict performance. So we'll see if a robot can have those things.
And then I want to ask Jeff to weigh in on the case for robots, because I know you're an advocate, but let's hear the 3 things.
No, let's hear the 3. Yeah.
You'll tell me if it's this is
Okay,
doable.
yeah.
But so in their latest research, and that's changed and evolved over time, and my co-founder and I at Koru have been doing this for a long time. He at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he funded research that Angela Duckworth did on grit and a number of other things, and a lot of the stuff that never got commercialized. And there's a lot of evidence about what drives performance in the workplace in the innovation economy, which is different than in previous times. So if you're going to analyze things pre-hire, there are really only 3 buckets of things that are shown to be predictive. One is your cognitive ability. So your raw smarts matter to a point, although higher IQ does not necessarily mean better workplace performance, but smart enough matters. The second is your technical skills to do the job. If you're a software engineer, knowing how to code. If you're a driver, knowing how to drive a commercial vehicle. And the third is non-cognitive competencies, or soft skills. And this is the area, think of those as 3 equally important things. We typically weight the first 2 very heavily, and we have lots of ways to measure cognitive ability, although there's a lot of bias in cognitive assessments, which is challenging for diversity. But this third one is these non-cognitive competencies, not personality, so not introversion, extroversion, but soft skills. So we have a list of them. They're things like grit, the ability to persevere through ambiguity, teamwork, the ability to recognize emotions in other people and draw out the best from a team, augment the team. Impact, so knowing the priorities of the organization and making sure you prioritize your time around those things. Curiosity, so there's others like that. But those are the 3 buckets of things. So if a robot could be programmed to have the ability to draw out the best from a team and have emotional intelligence, and that person who's not speaking in the corner of the room, but you think they have something to say, asking them and inviting them into the conversation, that's what teamwork is. That augments the diversity in your organization to have business impact. Then maybe a robot could be a great employee.
Well, what do you think, Jeff? As I say, your association represents lots of manufacturers of robots and so on, as an advocate for them.
Right.
We all know mechanistically what robots can do, but in the age of rapidly advancing AI, what about the soft skills? What are your members working on that could give us some reassurance that the future will look different than the past, where robots typically were, let's say in the automotive assembly lines, they did a job that humans didn't want to do or couldn't do?
Well, I think it still comes down to the ability to do a job that either people can't do or don't want to do. The soft skills, I think, are going to remain with the people, because I think the future is people and robots working together. Now, there are advances like Curry here that I think may change things in the home environment, but in the workplace, I mean, the reality is if we didn't call it a robot, you wouldn't be having this discussion. If I said, oh, let's have this discussion about machine tools, they need soft skills. No, they don't. They need to do a job.
Right, but to your point, that has been how things have been looked at, but the trend among the industrial robotics companies, you can take a look at ABB with its robot Yumi and, and its competitors,
Yes.
Is so-called cobots, ones that work safely alongside humans, right?
Safely
Not in a cage.
Right.
And that's really the hot trend these days on factory floors.
Yes.
And there, safety is one thing. You don't kill your coworker, that'd be
Right.
terrible. But people are social creatures. And so are you seeing amongst the industrial robot companies, not the B2C or the consumer-oriented companies like his, trying to understand workers may get tired during the day, they enjoy a joke or a light moment. Is there any movement at all to embed some of the soft skills that we've talked about that seem to be important in predicting success, or to bring them out in workers? Could you see that happening?
I could see it happening. I haven't seen much of that happen.
That's not a big deal.
Because right now, again, you talk about applications for traditional robots to serve coffee as a barista or to serve a beer or whatever these innovative applications could be. It's the task itself that's the key. It's not the ability to chit-chat with the customer yet. The application is driving where the robot's going to be used. And whether it's working side by side or in a cage, nothing has changed there yet. Could it? Yeah, of course.
Right.
No.
Maybe, Mike, we can turn to you. You've obviously taken a different path. You talk about creating sort of charismatic robots. Ones you have Curry in your own home with your very young children and your giant dog trundling around. Can you talk about some of the challenges that are involved with this kind of environment, and what's different about how you conceived your robot and the human-robot interface?
Certainly. One of the things that is different about the home environment is you have to be welcomed in, and you have to be given permission by everyone in the family to be there. In a service environment or an industrial environment, it's part of someone's job to go interact with the robot. Hey, welcome, it's Tuesday. Here's your new robot assistant. It'll be doing this. Your house, it's voluntary. You have to want to have that robot in your house. Joy is central to acceptance of robotics.
That's not a word I normally associate with robots, so tell
Robot
us what you
joy
mean.
matters a ton. It matters a ton because when you're bringing something in that's new, that has this rich history, we have science fiction, we have all kinds of different robots we dreamed about and hoped for when we were kids. You have to acknowledge the huge emotional component when you say, I have a robot and it's gonna be in your house. A whole bunch of stuff shows up and you have to bring people into the light, optimistic part of their brain that says, boy, this is gonna be really fun. And that has everything to do with creating Curry's shape. She's nice and non-threatening. Also, we make sure she is very much robot-looking rather than fake human. Don't want to fall into the uncanny valley.
Okay.
That joy lets you into the house. It lets people open their minds a little bit. Also, the most important bit, when your robot does something that is imperfect, and all robots will be imperfect for a very long time, joy gets you forgiveness. When you look at a robot that is trying really hard to do something, and you see that Curry really wants to go somewhere, and say you have a 2-year-old who really likes to dump his Legos right in front of her, and so her path is blocked. For instance, theoretically. If that happens, joy is what makes you say, okay, I'll help you out, robot, and I'll help you do that. It makes you want to help, and it enlists you, and you feel like you're doing it together. And I think that's absolutely essential in robotics, instead of going with pure hard utility, the instant your toaster fails to make toast, it's a busted appliance and it gets thrown out. Robots need to find a way to get more permission to grow and learn.
So what gives them that permission? I mean, you make a pretty good case. If you could get that joy or the goodwill from family, that would be great for you and your robot. How do you earn it? Like, in other words, what does your robot actually do other than sit there and blink at people, which is very disconcerting? What function does it perform in the house?
So Curry's main function, what she does, is she automatically captures great moments that are happening, and her left eye is a HD video
So
camera.
she's a snoop. She goes around videoing everything.
Think of her as your own personal videographer.
Okay.
And she's a videographer that is completely private. You control her, you control the data inside of her, but she has her own taste, and she learns that taste from what you like or don't like. If you like more of a certain clip and you find out that you always like shots of the two boys in the living room in the afternoon, she'll give you more of that. And that's the adaptive growing part that's so important. So she has to earn her keep by doing something useful, but doing that useful thing in a joyful way is the magic mix, in our opinion, for home robots being adopted broadly into the home.
But I think she's got speakers too. I mean, is it
Absolutely.
like a Siri with wheels or a Alexa with wheels, or is it you have a different concept?
She definitely can play her favorite songs, and she can play podcasts or what have you. Those are things that smart speakers can do.
Right.
What is unique about her is that she knows that this would make a great shot. She has taste about what would make a really good shot, and she will move to frame that shot right, so the videos that she captures are really awesome, and you'll love them.
Okay, very interesting. Jeff, you expressed a concern when we were having an earlier exchange with some of the models of hiring. You pointed out that you're an English major, and
I am.
do you want fries with that? That there's a bias in humans about English majors that if we have models that replicate existing biases in the ways that AI does stuff, that this is something we have to watch for. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing and what your concerns are more broadly?
Well, I think that came up in some of the earlier panels too, that the bias that is built in, especially if you're looking at your own team and what is their background, what are you going to be looking at to say, well, okay, they didn't have to be a great student, but they had to have this baseline ability or this knowledge. Would that rule out a bunch of people who didn't have a background that are on your current team? That would be my question for you.
Yeah, it's a good question, and one we get a lot. We get that question, meaning, so at Koru we create predictive models unique to companies that are the means by which you should screen your applicants to get high-fit applicants for your objective, performance, retention, whatever your objective is. And the question is, so typically what happens is we actually collect data from existing employees, and we collect about 450 data points in areas that we know to be useful in predicting performance. And actually we do collect major and classes taken. Like if you've taken a statistics class or if you've taken a calculus class, sometimes that makes you a better lawyer in some companies, for example. Very interesting. The question though is very much relevant. Do you get a homogeneous group of people? Are you going to get everyone that's the same as the people you've already got? And so a couple things that are really important there. First of all, when you do have these predictive models, you end up having between 5 and 15 factors that drive performance. And so what's good is machines are very good at measuring multiple things like that and then weighting them instantly, and then comparing that individual to a predictive model. Therefore, there are actually many ways to get to high fit. So in a case example where high-performing account executives, salespeople, there is evidence in this benchmark study we did that people who have a theater major, who've taken a theater course or have a theater major, are better at being account executives. So that's really interesting. It's actually a very strong predictor. And having said that, you can still be high fit if you weren't a theater major if you wait on other things. So there are many, many paths to get to this high fit in this models. But the other critical thing is there are actual EEOC regulations that if you're going to use a assessment to make decisions with hiring, you need to ensure that there is not bias and there are no adverse impact elements to what you're doing. So ensuring that you're not biasing against diversity. And actually we do an impact analysis with every single predictive model that we create. So we actually have to ensure that we don't have that. And so while it's a valid question, the reality is today, the way we hire is very biased. And actually today what you're going to end up is a lot more Me Too hiring, because you have this selection factor based on things like where you got into school when you were 17, or where your parents were lucky enough to help you get into school when you were 17, or these drivers of performance that are not relevant. And then what we're ending up doing is we're seeing applicant pools of 15 to 20% diversity and hiring rates of 2% diversity. So you're actually screening out diversity in today's processes.
Hi, my name is Gabriella, and I'm part of Accenture. I had a question around how you are working with companies to manage bias after the screening process. So I don't think that human bias necessarily goes away once individuals are there for the interview. I also had a second question, which was around, I think in the beginning of this conversation, you talked about how companies aren't properly using their own employees. So my question is, how are you working with companies not only on identifying new talent from outside the firm, but how are companies thinking about how to take their existing talent and reskill or repurpose the talents that they have to other roles? Is this something that is part of the scope of the type of services that you offer, and any recommendations?
Yeah, I'll answer the first question very quickly, which is that you're right. If you do unstructured interviewing, which most people do, your chances of hiring a better performer are like 8% higher than no interview at all. So the interview process is very biased, conscious or unconscious, and we do Me Too hiring or mini-me hiring. We take the first 5 minutes to decide somehow if this person's a fit, and then the last 55 minutes of the interview confirming our bias. So structured interviews are a good first step, or there are companies who are eliminating interviewing. And those are the outliers that don't talk about it very much publicly, but there are some companies.
Amazon is one of them, right? At least for some of their hires?
There is some people that say that Amazon
it is rumored.
Getting there. Yeah.
It is reported.
So they.
Is that a good idea?
It cuts both ways. I think the experience for an applicant is very important. So having a human touch is critical. And at the same time, the interview process is rife with challenges. Structured interviewing has been very much the trend. So how do you do structured problem-based interviews is a step in the right direction. Training people to do that consistently is actually very challenging. So it is around allowing humans to be assisted by robots or AI to make decisions and making humans better deciders, but being objective at looking at data is the big change that we're making, I think.
I'm Bask from Dell. I think even in hiring, still laws and regulations are going to be important, because I get the strange feeling you're doing AI, it's a non-biased thing. We don't even interview people. I just happen to get a lot of men. So you can't really blame me. That's how the algorithm turns out to be. Is what we should watch out for. I'm not saying it's happening. So it is good to have some laws and other regulations to actually look and see, are you even if the logic is right, you just don't want to end up with the same kind of people, right?
Yeah, if you had a gender bias in your model, you would get in trouble for using it. So that's why the impact study is so critical. Yeah, absolutely, and that would be, like, we would not allow a customer to use a model that had gender bias or underrepresented minority bias, so we actually have to test for that. So I think, again, today it may be more prevalent than in the case of using an objective model.
Another question? I have a question, actually. It's about culture. Every CEO insists that corporate culture is extremely important, that their culture is distinctive, they work on it, they think about it, they write lines that express in pious ways how their culture is distinct. And so on. So clearly there's some role for company culture. How does an algorithm, especially if a company like Amazon may or may not be hiring some proportion of its workforce without even meeting the person, how do you test for elements of cultural fit? How do you weed out psychopaths? I mean, people who may test well, but or maybe a bad influence at work. Isn't there ultimately a human element that's involved or should be involved? And that's being missed if you rely entirely on the AI.
Question for me? Yeah, so if culture is expressed as a set of competencies, which increasingly cultures are, so Zillow has a cultural principle that winning is fun. You can break that down into achievement orientation and a few other things if you ask what they mean by that. And we're actually working with companies now to help them to have an unbiased measure of culture fit, because it's very commonly the reason people discount people to say they're just not a culture fit, which is oftentimes, bad code for they're not like me. And so that's become a challenge. So this term culture fit is a little bit of a lightning rod right now in talent acquisition, because it's very challenging to do objectively.
It's hard to do it right, isn't it? Yeah. Any thought on culture? You deal with so many companies that are engineering-oriented, technology-oriented in your associations. How do they think about culture?
Well, culture is important, and actually robots are contributing to the culture by
In what way?
by doing menial jobs and repetitive jobs that people don't want to do. It's allowing people to do more high-value jobs. And so they like working with the robots. There used to be traditionally, when industrial robots were first introduced, there was all this resistance in the first auto factories where robots were introduced. But now you're seeing companies happy to have a robot coworker, if you will, because it's doing things that they didn't want to do anyway and allowing them to do better things.
I mean, the worry is that the pace of change is so fast that you will have fewer people doing menial work, but then you'll just have fewer jobs.
Well, there's no
surely that's the
indication of that
concern.
yet. In fact, most of the studies show something just the opposite of that, despite the media reports that showing, and our research shows that as robot use goes up, unemployment goes down. So we don't see that.
You don't see it?
No.
All right. Well, it is one of the great debates of the age. Obviously, there are analyses on both sides of that argument.
Yeah.
But I'd expect the man from the Robot Association to defend.
You would expect it, but McKinsey and Company, who's widely reported as saying that robots are going to replace up to 30% of the jobs, they actually, at every one of those levels, that was their midterm level, showed more jobs would be created than lost. That's not been widely reported.
Right.
But 800 million jobs will be lost. 890 million new jobs will be created. I haven't seen that anywhere.
Sure. No, you've seen it in The Economist, but
Okay,
maybe
good.
not other places.
Okay.
Now, we have just a minute left. I'm going to challenge you, Mike. You told us that your company is devoted to bringing joy into our lives and that you have a robot that is devoted to this. What's the most joyous thing you think that Curry can do to prove your case?
So-
The floor is yours for a minute.
With that, Curry's most joyful thing that she does is she loves to dance, and she loves to dance to her favorite song.
Oh, I'd like to see that.
So, it's always wonderful to get Curry, who's sometimes she'll wake up and she'll say, boy, I had tilted, and you'll see her kind of bounce around a little bit. But when she's bopping around in her house, my 5-year-old loves to say, hey, Curry, play your favorite song.
Pancake robot is coming to town. He's mixing up the batter and he's laying it down. Buttermilk, blueberry, chocolate chip. 50 million pancakes he's gonna flip. All you can eat, yum yum. All you can eat, yum yum. The pancake robot is coming to town. All you can eat, yum yum. All you can eat, yum yum. It's a pancake explosion, come and party down.
I think I was right to distrust a robot on stage, right? Just too adorable. All right, please join me in thanking our 3 human panelists, as well as Curry, your companion in your home. Thank you very much.